No question. This is a major shock for a community. Mm-hmm. So it's a double shock, you know, for those coming in, that, as somebody from another country was just telling us, you know, just, you know, imagine that, you know, close your eyes and imagine that you open your eyes and you find yourself in a town where nobody knows you, in a street that is not your street, in trying to speak a language that nobody understands, trying to understand rules that have nothing to do with the place you left behind. So it's an accommodation that initially is hard for both those who are coming in and those who are old residents, who are also encountering this large influx. If that accommodation is not well managed, if that accommodation is not supported by enormous goodwill efforts on both sides, but particularly from those who have the resources, who understand, who have planned it, who have participated in the recruitment, the pain is greater. And not just at the beginning. I mean, there were welcoming centers and that were formed often in communities as a result of new immigration, sometimes sooner, sometimes later. But the process of accommodation and integration continues and needs to be supported all along. I think absolutely, you know, it is, it has enormous impacts on communities that have to figure out how to educate children of different languages, that have to adapt their, maybe even their street signs, or so that you don't have unnecessary traffic accidents, or think about how you're going to handle court cases or health issues and so forth, so that you can accommodate a working population that you have attracted to your town. In order to supply a labor force that wasn't there. This catch-all phrase, white flight, but sometimes it's not literally white flight. I mean, people running away because Latinos are, or African Americans are coming in, but sometimes, of course, some of that is that. Yeah. But some of it is because this exodus has been occurring, you know, for a long time in rural Nebraska. So there's this revolution of rising expectations in these newer generations that are no longer met by rural living. So they've been living for a long time. And of course, they do live in larger numbers as these processes of integration are not as successful as they could have been. Integration is something that requires purposeful effort, and we failed. And so many of these older residents saw their communities, whether rightly or wrongly, they see their communities overburdened, their schools overburdened, and they're saying, we're out of here. And then yes, I mean, race, ethnicity, those elements enter into the whole calculation, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, whether it's as an initial cause or as a justification that comes later. But really, it is the larger structural changes and our incapacity to do integration well. You know, in a country and in a state that has all kinds of human resources, we can do a much better job. And all of us are to blame for those kinds of situations where you have then, the issue is not that whites leave. The issue is that white educated middle-class professionals that pay taxes at a higher rate and leave. And then you have guaranteed that that community will become poorer and will become overburdened. And then you're going to, for sure, trigger that vicious cycle that the poorer it gets, the more overburdened it gets, the more people leave. The more people leave, the more they tend to blame the Latinos. But it's not the Latino, it's the entire, you gotta look at the whole picture. Is that we had all these elements and we failed to handle them correctly. We failed to harness this incredible energy of new young people, of workers, of the possibility of having a second generation that was fully educated and integrated. And instead you have high dropout rates in many cases. You have despair. The poorest of the poor in each country seldom can put together the kinds of resources that you need to migrate. But it's often those families that have been exposed to the possibility of higher expectations for their children's education. That is a major one. To be able to give their children a better life than they have had. And so they don't want their children to be just a farm worker, or I shouldn't say just, but a farm worker without the benefits that may come with a university degree, or at least even if it's an associate level degree. So expectations for their family, higher, and for themselves. You also have, we forget that in Nebraska we also have a growing number of professionals who are immigrants, but again, who are not necessarily finding it that easier to stay. Clearly, both are coming to improve whether their own individual career expectations, expectation for a middle class that maybe has also been somewhat shattered at their home countries. Many come escaping situations of violence, whether it's domestic violence or country's violence, or whether that violence is safety, personal safety, due to deteriorating conditions in certain cities, or places where political conflict is, like Colombia, continues to be important, although less than it used to be, but certainly still Guatemala, Salvador. We still have many of those issues that were prevalent in the initial migration of the 1980s. They're still there, even though in different guise. And they come because they're called. They come because recruitment is the major first trigger of this migration. You don't sit at home saying, I wish I had a better job. I think I'll go to Nebraska. It doesn't happen that way. It happens because somebody understands that there are people with rising expectations and comes to your door, whether it's through a flyer, through an ad in the paper, through radio on the border, or through connationals that go back, and that sometimes are even hired to go back and recruit their counterparts, and say, come. And of course, once that starts, then they come because their families are here, because their friends are here, because you need that kind of social support system, whether you're at home or abroad.